evening, everyone. Thank you, Dia. I don't think I've had a nicer introduction to that. Delighted to be here. This is the second edition where I've had the privilege of being either virtually on stage or physically on stage. And I just want to give you one forewarning before we kick off this conversation. There is going to be a large optimism bias in everything that I say. That's by definition and by nature, but I have Venkat over here to bring me down to earth. So he has all the challenges that we're going to talk about, and I'm going to talk about the opportunities. But I just wanted to continue from the conversation that we picked up a year ago, just on India and healthcare and investments and an opportunity to really grow. And I wanted to say three things. The first is I do think, just like last year, we're sitting in a fantastic place of growth, which forms a platform for all of this. We're a $3.5 trillion economy. We've seen the numbers being thrown around. It's probably going to be $5 trillion by the end of the decade. Those are very large numbers. And if those numbers are going to play out and healthcare is going to be a very large opportunity, I think it's useful to think about what share of that we want to participate in, right? So those are very, very large numbers. And every time we think of a small initiative and a small number, just think of it in terms of that huge number. And that's beautiful because that economy is driven by both a consumption economy. India, 48% of GDP is like consumption, and exports and manufacturing, like our panel spoke about, right? So it's a nice balance. I think the second thing that I just wanted to capture was if you look at our tech stack and you look at the JAM layer, Jan Dhan, Aadhaar, mobile, 1.3 billion Indian bank, you look at UPI, you look at the modularization that's been set up, you look at the farmer ID, logistics, ULIP, OSEN, which is open credit, you look at all of this coming together, that's going to form a pretty fantastic platform for us to work off, even in healthcare, on technology, right? So just a heads up for large GDP, large economy, large growth opportunity, but large technology platform as well. And the third is the healthcare platform that we have. India contributes to 30% of global drugs, 30%, largely our generics industry. Around 5 years of lifespan that's been added over the last few years. 80% of that has come because of drugs. 80% of that has come because of generic drugs. So you can see the impact on actual lifespan being expanded because of what Indian pharmaceutical industry has been able to do. And that dynamism has now begun to spill over into other areas. You're seeing devices as a big platform and bet that several of you, but several of the industry is betting on. You're going to see the next chapter coming out really of medical devices. You've seen bio-CDMO. I think Atroth itself is an investor and has led the show on that, but you're seeing a lot of those opportunities. And similar to that, you're going to see a lot of adjacent to pharma industries, which could be based out of India, but take over for the world, right? But we're talking about 20%, 25% of it coming out of this country. That's the nature of the opportunity in front of us. I did warn you it's going to be optimism biased. We will talk about the numbers behind each of those and why we believe there is an opportunity for India to build towards that. But to kick us off, I think we wanted to take a minute to just talk about where is India and all of its health outcomes. And this is where it gets a little depressing, but a little bit of a glimmer at the end of the tunnel as well. Venkat, I don't know if you want to take over and I'll come back for it.
Yeah, happy to. Nice to see all of you. It's opportunities, not challenges that I'll talk about, hopefully. Right? But to add to my very nice introduction by Dia, I have been a consumer enthusiast user of a CGM for 2 years. I heartily endorse it for everybody. Right? I wish there would, there's more innovation to make it more accessible for people in India. But I think that was a great discussion, I thought, and teed up a lot of the themes that you will hear, hopefully, right? I'm also conscious that we are bang in between all of you and dinner, which is never a great situation to be in. So we'll try to hit the big messages and get through it quickly. So picking up from where Satya left off, right? It's been a decade of a lot of progress. If you look at Indian healthcare overall, I think this page shows some of those statistics, right? Broadly, the messages here are that people are living longer, right? So mortality or life expectancy has gone up from about 67 to 71, and people are also living with less illness, if you will, right? And you'll see those markers in infant mortality, in maternal mortality, and so on and so forth, right? And the overall disease burden has come down, right? If you measure it using dailies, right? Disease adjusted life years. So people are losing fewer years, to either early deaths or due to illness, right? That's great. It's celebratory. There is obviously, you can see from the charts, right, that a lot of the gap between India and say ASEAN, right, which is a slightly more prosperous group, has closed, right? But the frontier is still significantly further away, right? So there's lots of opportunity. Now, what drove these improvements, right? Not surprisingly, it's not any one thing, right? There's been a lot of improvement along a lot of different aspects of healthcare, right? One, access has improved both in terms of the quantum of healthcare that people can access, but also the quality of that, right? And kind of the ease with which they can access it. Whether it is in terms of the talent, right, physicians, nurses, and so on, there's been very meaningful growth over the last decade. Beds have improved, and so on and so forth, right? This is not chart-busting growth, right, the way other areas of Indian infrastructure have grown. So this is not multiples of where we were, right, but it's meaningful growth. The second, actually, a more exciting growth is taking place in the affordability sphere. Some folks have referred to it before, right? In 2 or 3 ways. One is, I think, with economic growth, the economic means to deploy towards healthcare is increasing, and there's lots of research that shows that, especially at the bottom of the pyramid, healthcare is often treated as discretionary spend, not essential spend. So as economic well-being increases, actually the spend on healthcare grows up disproportionately, right? So that's one. Two, insurance coverage has gone up, right? Both on the the group corporate side, but even more so on the government side with PMJ and so on. So today, these numbers are end in 2020 because of COVID and all the messiness that creates. But about half the population has some kind of coverage, right? Which is already, you can see the results, the outcomes in terms of the reduction in out-of-pocket spend, right, on healthcare overall. But this is on a steep trajectory of increase. So 10 years from now, we'd be looking, we're probably looking at 80-90% of the population covered by some form of insurance, right? That opens up lots of different opportunities for people. And then the last thing is, in people's just general awareness of healthcare and being able to take, the interventions that will drive improvements, that has gone up. So, the universal immunization program, for example, is a stellar success. 75% of, the target populations, for example, get all the immunizations now. So across all of these, I think these put together have caused these improvements, right? However, but part of it is that there is a lot more ground to cover than we have covered. And again, this is across all of these same areas as well. If you look at access, for example, right, there's a huge talent issue. I think somebody on the panel talked about it previously. And this is a particularly difficult challenge also to solve because, if you start a program now, 10 years from now, you'll have a surgical oncologist, right, come out of a program. So you have to invest far ahead of when the problem gets solved here. And until you solve that problem, you can't build hospitals, right? I think today in India there is no shortage of capital to go build facilities, right? The gating factor often becomes the talent that you have and the ability to attract the talent in the places that you need it, right? So you can go build a fancy hospital in rural Jharkhand, right? But good luck getting the best doctors to go live in that place to serve that population, right? Again, so that's one big challenge, right? The second challenge, and the common theme across all of these, is also kind of the dispersion, right, in between, to use the commonly used term of India 1 and India 3 or India 4, for example, right? So if you have good coverage in a metro city today, you have the best care in the world, right? But if you are not, it is closer to the worst in the world, right? So one metric on the access side is, Kerala has something like 4.2 physicians per 1,000 people, right? And the comparable number in Jharkhand is 0.7, right? So we have a huge gap to cover in terms of making it equal, and that you see the same inequality across all the other dimensions as well, right? So on quality, right, is a big challenge, and that's also probably the biggest opportunity in improving overall healthcare, right? Because this is improving outcomes through investments and assets that you've already built out and you've already made, right? So here, it looks pretty stark, right? There's single-digit percentage of hospitals and labs are NABH certified, and these are still just input metrics, right? We have no output metric. We have no idea at the India level, for example, what readmission rates look like, right? Because we don't capture it, there are no systems, regulation is behind as well, and so on and so forth, right? I know this same theme applies to some of the other sectors of healthcare as well, right? Whether it's pharma, medtech, and so on and so forth. Every now and then it pops its head to talk, to create headlines. So this notion of quality and the focus on quality, right, is a challenge that needs to be kind of addressed soon enough. Insurance, I think the trajectory here is looking better, right? There's the missing middle problem, as they say, right? The 30% who don't have either the corporate insurance or the government insurance, they do often miss out on healthcare because of that. Closing that gap is important, but then at the same time, improving the quality of coverage for the rest of the population is also important, right? Today, there is coverage, but it covers, it's fairly basic and minimal. It's fairly focused on sick care, right? Not on preventative care and so on and so forth, right? And the last thing is that even as the country is getting healthier, right, as measured by dailies, the nature of the challenge, right, is shifting, right? So as we have done a good job of eradicating or dealing with a lot of the communicable diseases, the total disease burden has stayed roughly the same. That space has been occupied now by the non-communicable lifestyle diseases, right? So you'll see the chart, the white is growing, and it's growing pretty starkly. This is not unique, right? This is the trajectory most countries go on. But the fact that the nature, on the scale of glass half full to glass half empty, we are somewhere in the glass is changing shape level right now, right? So just figuring out how to address this changing nature of disease burden through the capacity and the access we have is going to be the next big challenge.
If I may just add 2 points here. I think one is on incomplete insurance coverage. We've probably seen that statement applied to India now for 2 decades, right? For all of us who've been talking about it. I think there are 2 changes. I think one is just the policy and mindset of the IRDA to allow actually have, by the way, in terms of just the number of products available in India, we're comparable to any other market, right? If you look at India's largest health insurer, someone like Star, you have 600,000 agents on ground, right? That's a multiple of any pharma company, for example. So one would argue it's not access either. But if you think about the actual pivot to usage, I think with some of your new age insurance companies, your Digit Insurance and all of them coming through, you've seen an uptake in products that are micro health insurance, that are very disease specific, beginning to shift the way, to Venkat's point, glass half full, half empty, actually changing the shape of the glass, which very much like in financial services where we kind of leapfrogged cards to UPI, you'll actually see a different shape of insurance coverage than in any other market, right? And I think there lies in an opportunity to actually change these numbers, not in the way we've seen in every other market, but in a way that's very unique to the way India is going to grow. And the same thing around quality inequality. I think there's a way of growing, but for those of you who are seeing some of the infrastructure spend in India, you'd know that there's rapid urbanization, of course, but for those of you who've driven between Mumbai and Pune, there's a little society called Lodha Palava in between. That's a 5 million people ecosystem, and that doesn't fall into your classical urban, rural, semi-urban kind of classification. And that has its own ecosystem of healthcare coming up. So the way this is going to develop is not by really going out there and setting up the next dozen government hospitals, but the quality and way care is going to get delivered is going to change in the way India itself is growing. So I think it's useful to think about the shape of the glass rather than whether the glass is filling or empty.
It's all glass half full from now on. Yeah, the challenge part of the presentation is done. So what does it mean, right? So if you think about the path forward, right? One important notion to consider is the fact that what got us here will not get us there, right? Which is the fact that if you look at life expectancy growing or improving by 4 years over the last decade, the next 4 years at the same pace will take 15 years, right? Because the low-hanging fruit, if you will, unfortunate use of term, are taken, right? So every other country takes progressively longer to improve healthcare, right? So to go from 81 to 82 will take you 6 years, right? So it gets harder, so we need newer solutions, right? The leapfrogging mentality, the mentality that a lot of people talked about. Two is, I think India has, a stated ambition, right, to through the SDG goals of meeting almost developed country level, healthcare outcomes by 2030, right? Now we are not going to get there, by linearly increasing our healthcare capacity, having the same kind of insurance products, right, or pharmaceutical products. This, if India were to have a shot at getting close to, the stated ambition, right, by 2030, it will require, almost by definition, this leapfrogging mentality across, a variety of fronts, right? And there are a bunch of, tailwinds, if you will, that help along this way, right? So because this build out in healthcare, if you will, is happening at the same time that a lot of other exciting things are happening in the economy, right? On the demand side, consumers and their behaviors are changing, right? People using CGMs, people taking ownership of their healthcare. They're a lot more digital. They're a lot more demanding now and a lot more aware, which is great. I mean, it wasn't the case even 10 years ago, right? A guy living in anywhere in rural India today buys the same things as somebody who's living in a metro. Reads the same stuff, watches the same shows, has the same access to financial services, right? And so that thing hasn't yet percolated. That the benefits of this connectivity, right, haven't percolated down to the healthcare sector yet, right? And that's an opportunity. That's a huge opportunity to leapfrog. On the supply side, similarly, there are trends, right, that show there is tech, healthcare anywhere in the globe, right? I spent 10 years in the US serving US health systems on technology. Anywhere in the globe, healthcare is a low tech density industry, right? So there's lots of opportunity. It's particularly so in India, right? But as the cost of technology goes down, right, and the cost of experimenting with technology goes down, we should expect to see more and more of that coming into healthcare, especially in places like India, because unlike in, say, some parts of the developed world, the alternative to a tech-enabled, healthcare solution here is not, a human healthcare solution, right? It is not having any healthcare at all. So that should help more solutions come to the market here, right? There's capital, as I was saying earlier, is not an issue in most parts of healthcare today in India. If you have a good idea and a well-defined market, I think capital will find its way to you somehow, right? Which is again a big change since almost 10 years ago, right? And then there is more formalization, more aggregation happening in healthcare. But even with all that has happened in the past few years, the organized, on the health services side, right, the organized corporate share of hospital beds is under 10% today, right? So everything we saw, right, or we'll see soon too in terms of economics, we're still talking about a very small portion of Indian healthcare. And if and as that expands to the rest of the country, right, the numbers in terms of opportunity, right, for investors, entrepreneurs, for everybody involved are going to be huge. And then the final thing is there are structural tailwinds as well, right? One part of it is there was discussion earlier about the changing nature of government and government's role, right? Both on the policy side, but also on the on the actual public investment side, right? And in terms of digital infrastructures, there is an architecture and there is intent to do the same thing in healthcare through the healthcare the digital mission. So this is all like the early stages of UPI, right? So there is potential for this to leapfrog in the same way. Similarly, all the geopolitical tailwinds, if you can call it that momentarily, are also helpful in building solutions that might actually be more viable now because you have the opportunity to build for the world, right? Sitting in India, right? So on and so forth. I'll skip through some of these because we have, I think, covered lots of optimism. Yeah.
I think just two things to talk about here, and I think we'll do disservice if we do linear projections for healthcare as well. But maybe three factoids. Just look at the number of smartphones. Look at the UPI transactions in August 2023, right? It's 782 million to 10 billion. There's also FASTag somewhere over here. So if you look at the FASTag transactions from 2019 to 2022, there is a version of this which is healthcare grows linearly. There's a version of this that basically says what's the equivalent of these metrics using tech for healthcare. And I think there are a whole bunch of them. There could be percentage of global population serviced by Indian medical devices. There could be biologic CDMO, percentage of products that actually move here. But there could also be percentage of insurance products that are innovated out of India for the world. They're going to be first to market products that come out of here. But industry by industry, segment by segment, I do think you'll see a version of this with metrics that matter to us, where you'll see a very sharp growth over the next decade in healthcare.
Absolutely. With all of this, right, so there's what this means, for people who are looking to invest, right, or a startup, right, in this space, there are big numbers, right? So, our own projections show that the overall industry, as considering all the subsectors, will almost triple over the next, 7-8 years from what it is today, because it's compounding, and the portions of this that are growing the fastest are also the largest, right? And important, the health services space is growing fast. The pharma space is growing fast, about 20% style CAGRs, right? What this means is that there are opportunities that open up on two fronts, right? One is because this mirrors the broader growth of the economy, right? There are opportunities on the B2C side, right, in serving a whole new mass of consumers who are now able to afford healthcare services, pay for it, right, in a way that they were not able to before, right? But then the second one, 2A, really is investing into these growing markets, right, of health services, right, of pharma solutions for India is a big opportunity, both as direct provider of these services, but also, if you think about it, this trajectory will lift a lot of, what are today subscale service providers, right, to a level where they can be very attractive consumers of B2B solutions, right? There was discussion earlier about how it's harder to monetize health tech solutions in India, right? But there will be a lot more of those B2B consumers in India over the next 10 years because the size of the pie is growing, 3x, right, just over the next few years. It's, a quick point that it's been remunerative, if you will, investing into healthcare over the past few years. This is a chart that shows the total returns to shareholders, right? Overall, healthcare in aggregate has returned more to public the public healthcare side of it, right? The publicly listed healthcare side of it has returned more in aggregate than the broader market, right? And within that, healthcare services, right, have by far returned even more than even healthcare in aggregate, right? So it's been this attractiveness, right, is not just theoretical, right? It's borne out by the capital and money flowing to the sector. And you'll see the same thing on the private investment side, right? There's, in the last 5 years, something like, the total investments have grown 3x, into healthcare, the private equity, venture capital investments. And this increase has been, fairly secular, right? Both in terms of, the number of deals, but also in terms of the deal sizes, right? Again, a bit of a leading indicator for the fact that the market is growing and there's opportunity and there's capital, right, to back the opportunity in the space. We'll switch gears, right? And then, so what does it mean if you were to participate in this, exciting, probably once in a generation opportunity, right, to advance healthcare, right, do well by doing good, kind of thing? What would it take? What's a good approach to take, right? Satya, you want to take this?
Yeah, I think it's opportune to be standing here at a time when ISRO launched a mission to a part of the moon that no one else has done. So there are definitely going to be a bunch of stuff that we need to fix. I think Indian healthcare is never going to be complete without talking about all the inadequacies that we have in the ecosystem, right? And whether that's the quality of care and the massive disparity or the access, or the fact that there is an opportunity to actually move from sick care to prevention. The panel just before us spoke about the power of triaging and really making sure that the right people go to the right places. I think there's an opportunity to build. I don't think we're done in pharma. I don't think we're done in devices. We've already seen what that's grown. But build for India beyond the cities, but also build in India for the world. I think both of those are themes, are investable themes, are underwritable themes, but also themes that are going to make a very big difference. No other sector outside of IT services do we have the center of gravity of the industry playing out of India, right? So I think IT services, potentially pharma manufacturing, are the two where you really have some form of center of gravity over here. And that's an opportunity to build further rather than play off. I think the third one, like we said, again, I'm just going back to what Shravan had mentioned in the panel before around, there is an opportunity to innovate. We are reverse engineering oriented in a lot of the work that we do. But there are ecosystems beginning to come together. For those of you who are familiar with COIN, which is the co-investment network that brings together so many people to invest into deep tech startups, there is support from the government now just in terms of different incentives and structures to do pharma innovation. There are going to be the first set of products launched in the US coming out of India, which are going to be innovative, but also an opportunity to create India for India solutions. We spoke about insurance, but across sectors, there is a way that we're going to leapfrog, which is to think about 10 years out rather than trying to mimic any other part of the world. So across each of these three, it's an opportunity, but definitely a bunch of stuff that needs to get done. And each of these three are very underwritable in terms of thesis for investment and startups and people to invest behind if you already look at the tailwinds and green shoots that you have across the three.
We'll leave you with, there's some more here on, all the themes that Satya talked about. The great thing about going last is that a lot of this is like a synthesis of what's been talked about already, right? So I'll skip ahead a few pages in the interest of time, but please do read the report when it hits your inboxes, right, in a few days. We'll leave you with maybe, this page, right, as a call to action, if you will, right? So the opportunity is huge, right? The opportunity, both to build at scale, exciting companies, right, on innovative ideas, but also the opportunity to, to really lift a whole segment of the population in terms of their healthcare and their healthcare outcomes, right, which will happen in this generation, right? So it's exciting to be part of, part of that process, right? So, the 3 or 4 themes that we've heard repeatedly, right, are, think big, right? Because as with everything in India, there are big numbers, right? So it's helpful to think about solutions that will touch the biggest masses, especially as, the affordability coverage goes up, right? There are sustainable businesses to be built here. It is possible to leapfrog in a lot of places, right? We don't have to take the same path that others do. There are digital first, digital only solutions that will make it more exciting in India. There is, a lot more virgin territory, right, outside of the big metros that has yet to be even discovered, right, much less served. And then the last thing is, this notion of quality, which is probably by far the biggest and the least attention getting aspect of, the set of challenges that we have today, right? So some combination of these, right, should lead to any solution to get to product market fit sometime quickly. I think that is all we had, right? We're happy to take a question.
Very good presentation. So I just wanted to know, did you also did a research on patent as well as non-patent literature for this report? Because you mentioned I think twice about tech-led innovation, and in your chart also you said fix, build, and innovate, right? So when we say innovation, we need to talk about intellectual property. In the space of bio and pharma, patents are the foremost IP asset that we can talk about. So did you did a research on patents and non-patent literature for this report?
Not sure what the question is, but if your question is around, is there an opportunity for India to have patented products out there? No research, but I think we know of enough companies, and some of them are in the room, that are pushing the envelope on launching those products. So I think Saroglitazar, for example, in India, was a first-to-market category patented product. It will have a life of its own globally. If you look at what Siddharth, for example, is doing, it's not product patent, but there is an innovation on a service. What
Process patent, yeah.
It's not patented, but it's an innovation. So I think there are both forms of innovation that are happening, but definitely stuff that's patented as well coming out of India.
So see, getting a patent in itself is a GTM strategy, go-to-market strategy, right? Why I'm saying this is because in India, we don't see, you can see a focus towards intellectual property. Whenever we go to FDA in USA, right, the talk is always about IP licensing, tech transfer. In India, why the tech transfer is not happening? In US, the tech transfer from university level to the commercialization to the market is 60%. India, it is less than 10%, right? And that is also subpar. Right, so we need to focus on IP, and that is where the key lies. It will open a lot of unlocked areas. And as Shravan talked about white spaces, so only through a IP search or a patent search or non-patent literature search, we can find the right white spaces, and then we can address them.
Don't disagree at all. It's an expensive and a long game, but we'll get there.
It's not an expensive game. From my IP background, it can be done.
For global?
Yes. It only needs a motivation and intention. Thank you so much.
All the better. And we agree with you completely. And there's a big opportunity there. But also, just to say, we use the term innovate in the broadest sense of the word, right? It's innovate on product, on service models, on business models, right? So there's the whole spectrum is ripe for innovation.
Okay, should we pause for dinner? I think we're available for conversations over.
Thank you.